Good afternoon. Earlier today, I attended the funeral of Casey Goodson Jr. at the request of his mother. No parent should have to bury their child, and I am heartbroken for Mrs. Payne, as well as Casey's siblings and his friends. Yesterday, the city had to inform the daughter of Andre Hill that her father had been killed at the hands of law enforcement, just like Casey. It is simply an unexplainable loss. The call for service early yesterday morning was a non-emergency call from a neighbor, not a 911 call, about a car in the street that was being turned on and off. Mr. Hill was known to the residents of the home where his car was parked on the street, and he was an expected guest. He was not an intruder. Earlier today, we released the body-worn camera footage from Adam Coy, the officer involved in the shooting. As I said yesterday, Officer Coy did not turn on his body-worn camera until after the shooting. A function of the camera provides us with a 60-second look back that captures the shooting, but without audio. We can see Mr. Hill coming out of the garage of the home with one hand raised with his cell phone and the other not visible. We cannot hear the verbal exchange between Officer Coy and Mr. Hill. We can see Mr. Hill be shot and fall to the ground. I said yesterday that I'm outraged by the shooting. I'm also very disturbed, but what I don't see next in the body-worn camera footage. From what we can see, none of the officers initially at the scene provide medical assistance to Mr. Hill. No compression on the wounds to stop the bleeding. No attempts at CPR. Not even a hand on the shoulder and an encouraging word that medics were en route. It is an officer's duty to not only summon a medic, but to render aid. Columbus Division of Police's core values are integrity, compassion, accountability, respect, and excellence. From the body-worn camera footage we've seen, these values were absent and not on display while Mr. Hill lay dying. Yesterday, I called on Chief Quinlan to relieve Coy of duty, stripping him of his badge, gun, and police powers. After further review of the incident, today, I am calling for the immediate termination of Coy. I will let Safety Director Pettus explain the process. Director.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a very sad day for our city. The city I grew up in, the city my grandchildren now grow up in, the city I've lived in all my life as a black man. To our black community, I say this: I know your pain, I understand your fears and your anger, but I am not just a black man. I am the Director of Public Safety. That carries with it obligations and responsibilities I cannot shirk. I am the sole person in the city of Columbus with the authority to hire police officers and to fire them. And when it comes to those decisions, any personal emotions have to be set aside. The process of public employee discipline is dictated by both the United States Constitution and the collective bargaining agreement, in this case, with the FOP. Public employees are entitled to due process. In a case such as this, the police chief is required to serve an officer with a list of charges against him or her. That employee will have a hearing before the public safety director. My commitment, my legal obligation is to conduct a fair, impartial hearing, and that is what I intend to do. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Director Pettus. I want to be clear that calling for Coy's termination is not prejudging him for the shooting. That investigation is being handled by BCI. I expect a full accounting of the evidence, truth to be sought, and justice to be served. However, Coy failed on two directives: not turning on the body-worn camera and failing to offer aid after the shooting. We give our officers great power, powers that no one else in our society have. The power to stop, to detain, to question, to arrest, to use force, and to even take life. And with that power comes great responsibility, including using body-worn cameras and rendering aid. Our community is grieving and suffering. A final goodbye to Casey Goodson this morning, and now we mourn the death of Andre Hill this afternoon. Enough is enough. This community is exhausted. The African American community is fearful, concerned, outraged, and exhausted. If there were other members of our community that were under threat, there were a menace to our Jewish brothers and sisters at synagogues, there were threats to the Asian American community, Indian American, Latinos, and places they lived, this community would come together and stand up to make sure our neighbors were safe. That is what we must do as a city, as a community. We are better than this, and we must make sure that everyone is safe. I'll be happy to take some questions.
Mayor, what can you tell us about Mr. Hill? Was he a Columbus resident? Can you just paint a picture for us of him?
Yeah, some preliminary information. I reached out to his daughter this morning and hoping to talk to her. Our office has been in contact with his brother as well. I don't know much about Mr. Hill at this moment, other than, trying to gather more information from family and friends about him. I believe so.
Do you know if he was at all related to the initial call about the SUV running, and if he had anything to do with the initial call that led officers there?
I do not. I believe that you all have gotten the footage as well as a copy of that initial call around noise or the car being started and stopped. Obviously not a call with any concerns of safety or fear, but just simply a call of a car being started and, somebody sitting in the car for some period of time. And we believe that was connected to Mr. Hill. As I said before, Mr. Hill was known to the residents at the home. He was expected. He was not an intruder. He had not committed any crimes. Not aware of any issues involving Mr. Hill.
Can you give us a reaction to when you saw that video? Tell us what you saw and what bothered you about it.
Well, I was stunned. And heartbroken when I saw the shooting of this man, of our neighbor. That was stunning enough. But then to see him lying in the driveway, minute after minute after minute after minute, with no attempt to render aid and comfort. To be honest, Louis, I had never seen body-worn camera footage like that, where literally no attempts to revive and aid this man, who had committed no crime, was dying. That is a stunning disregard for life, and in this case, black life, that is unacceptable in this community.
Do you know how many minutes it was before he was finally held?
Several minutes. I think we should have a specific number, but certainly more than 5, and maybe closer to 7 or 8 minutes. Yeah.
Was it
Several minutes.
Was it officers or was it emergency responders who first rendered aid to him?
We don't know that yet, exactly. But we know a medic was en route, but no officers on the scene from the footage we saw today attempted to offer any aid, comfort, or support, as they are required. Yes?
Will there be any other discipline for the other officers there who did not administer aid?
Officers that don't follow the policies, procedures, training, and directives of the chief and the safety director will be held accountable.
Is there body-worn camera of the second officer who was there?
We believe so, but I'm not sure if that's been released to the public yet, but it will be soon.
Has she been interviewed?
I believe that in a conversation I had with Attorney General Yost, one of the reasons we wanted to delay the release of the footage today was to make sure that the family had a chance to see the footage first before it became public, but also at the request of Attorney General Yost, who I spoke with yesterday, who was scheduled to interview the officer today, I believe, at 1 o'clock. And he wanted a chance to interview her before the footage became public, so we honored that request.
This might be a Pettus question. Director, what can you tell us about Adam Coy and his history with the department? How long has he been on? And our sources are saying that he had a history of issues with the department. I know there's a process that you need to go through. Can you explain that process, and what do we know about Adam Coy?
Yes, I can explain the process to you, but I can't tell you much about Adam Coy. The police chief notifies members of charges against them. They are entitled to just cause, which the police chief provides the comparables, if they exist, of similar misconduct, similar charges, similar discipline. He provides all of that to me. Members are entitled to representation, and so the member and their representation, their schedules are coordinated by my office along with my HR officer, a city attorney representative, and the chief's designees, which are usually representatives from Professional Standards and the Internal Affairs Bureau. They present the chief's case to me. Then the members' representation, the FOP, their legal representation, present a defense for the member. So the member is entitled to be notified. The chief has to also provide any awards, commendations, along with the member's personnel history. And
He can't be fired unless there's due process. Is that correct?
that's some of the due process that I'm explaining to you now.
And so timeline for that, so people that are watching have an idea of what we should expect here coming up at the end of this month and in January?
I have not heard from the chief yet, but I expect that I will hear from the chief soon. The chief is required to notify the member of any charges filed against him. He also notifies me I suppose the big question mark will be the coordination of those schedules. The member is entitled to be notified. The member is entitled to have representation. So we are required to coordinate schedules with the FOP and their attorneys. And that's the big question mark that I won't know until I'm notified. And I review the chief's recommendation. I determine whether I agree with it, dismiss it, or change it.
So that process could take several months.
No, it will not take several months. The chief has relieved the member of duty. I believe the contract indicates being relieved of duty without pay shall not be beyond 20 days.
So is he paid or not paid, just to clarify?
The relieved of duty without pay shall not be for longer than 20 days.
Because our indication was he was being paid.
There's being relieved of duty with pay and there's being relieved of duty without pay. I have not heard from the chief yet which one he has done. There is also being unassigned or being put on administrative duty. I understand the chief has relieved him of duty, which means he took his gun and badge and he no longer has the authority of a police officer. That's different than administrative assignment where you're just put at a desk.
The
Director, can you
termination
talk about the
process
training?
will begin immediately.
Thank you, sir.
The process that the directors outlined will begin immediately. A hearing will be held and determination will be made by the director as quickly as possible.
Have charges then been alerted to him or filed?
No, I believe that will take place in short order, today, tomorrow.
Will be?
Violation of the orders that I outlined earlier, refusal to turn on the body-worn camera, as well as not rendering aid. And there may be more.
For the mayor or the director, the Columbus police officers undergo some of the most rigorous training probably in the country. I mean, the Columbus Police Academy is a sought-after destination by police departments, but none of that seemed to be on display in this incident, at least if you look at the video. Does something need to change with, veteran officers training? Are they getting enough training after the academy?
Well, I think clearly what we saw on display did not meet this community's expectations and don't measure up to the Division of Police values and the training that folks undergo. So we're going to look at everything. But clearly, not having the cameras turned on, not rendering aid are two of the major issues. And that was not done just by one officer, but multiple officers. The refusal or inability, unwillingness to render aid. Clearly, we have a problem that we need to address.
Will those other officers' names be released and what discipline is possible for them?
Yeah, maybe the director can speak to that. I think obviously the chief will investigate that. We're focused primarily on this shooting and the process, the termination process that would involve Officer Coy, but certainly there were others that did not follow the policies and procedures of the Division of Police and what training had called for.
Mayor, has Quinlan been asked for resignation?
There are probably lots of folks that I've heard from that have called for his resignation. I have not asked for his resignation. But I think it's very important for the public to see the civilian oversight of the Division of Police. Director Pettus and I are charged by the community. Director Pettus answers to me, I answer to the community, and this Division of Police is being investigated for conduct and being out of policy and procedure. The director and I are going to hold the division, these officers, and ultimately the chief accountable for what has happened.
When will you decide whether Chief Quinlan stays or goes?
We're focused on getting truth and justice for these families, holding folks involved accountable. But I will, make that decision once we know more about this investigation and these facts.
Why is the Chief Quinlan here to talk about this?
Again, because I think the civilian oversight, the Division of Police is being investigated right now. and the members of that division are being investigated. And I think it's critically important for the community to see the civilian oversight that takes an oath to provide that oversight and accountability to the Division of Police. And so Director Pettus and I are charged with that, and that is exactly what we intend to do.
So did he want to be here and talk, but your office is saying that you guys as the civilian oversight should be speaking?
We are the civilian oversight on behalf of the public, and we will continue to hold this division accountable on behalf of the public.
We're seeing tension in the community and on the street. What can you as mayor tell those people in our community who are concerned about what they're seeing? You know, right now, 17 police-involved shootings this year in Columbus, BCI investigating 8 of those. What do you have to say to those people who want to hear from you as you lead this city during this tumultuous time?
Obviously, want these investigations to take place. There has to be a commitment to independence and accountability. The community has not always seen that with law enforcement in the past. I think it's important for us to remind folks all the reforms that have already been made. The fact that we did have body-worn cameras on our officers, their refusal to turn them on was a violation of policy and procedure, and we're holding folks accountable for that. We are setting up, as you know, a civilian review board, and folks can apply to be part of that civilian review board through January 15th. That board will be seated, and they will hire an inspector general that will have independent investigations over police misconduct in the future. So we're committed to the truth, wherever the truth takes us, and justice to hold folks accountable. And so I would ask them to continue to demonstrate restraint, patience, and peace. But you can't have peace without justice. And it's incredibly important that we're focused on that as peace.
Mayor, is there any indication that officers in general, though, aren't activating their body-worn cameras? Was this a one-off?
I don't believe we have seen an overwhelming amount of evidence where officers are not turning on their body-worn cameras. This was a situation that was different. I mean, it was a noise complaint, you know, an unusual car. And so the fact we went from a noise complaint to a police-involved shooting based on what we saw on the footage is pretty and highly unusual. And so I don't believe that there's any systemic effort to not turn on body-worn cameras. And I think it's critically important that we continue to hold people accountable that don't. Because the people, the community expects those cameras to be on. They invested over $5 million of their taxpayer dollars into that accountability and oversight. It is unacceptable for officers to not have their body-worn cameras on. And as you know, this year, we expanded that to our SWAT officers as well.
What does division policy call for in that situation, a non-emergency call? I mean, it did happen very quickly. Does the division require, I mean, was that officer required to have his body camera activated?
Yeah, once it went just for a call for service for a noise dispute, and there was an engagement with an individual, that I believe is the policy and procedure of the Division of Police, and that's what they're in violation of, is when it went from a noise complaint to that interaction with that individual that they hadn't been necessarily called to interact and deal with.
So, just playing devil's advocate, should they have turned them on when you see Mr. Hill first sort of walk forward? Is there a trigger point where the policy requires them to do it?
Yeah, I'd probably speak to the chief to that level of detail when it goes on and when it goes off, but my understanding is as soon as it went from investigating a very lower priority noise complaint to an interaction with the public or certainly on private property, that camera should have been on, but that could be a question the chief or, I don't know, director, if you want to answer it.
Those are some of the things that will take place in my disciplinary hearing. The chief's designees will present facts and circumstances charging the individual with violation of the policy. The FOP, their representative, and their attorney will present arguments as to why the member may have been in compliance with the policy. And so I can't get ahead of that hearing process for a specific case before it takes place, but in general, that's how the procedure will work.
My understanding of the policy, as to speak to Andrew's train of thought, is that the cameras were turned on for priority 1 and 2 calls, like your robberies, your murders, and that for a noise complaint, they wouldn't necessarily do it. So what is that trigger point? Do we know that?
Yeah, that's what I was just speaking to. I think when it went from just responding to the noise complaint, interacting with a member of the public, particularly on private property. But I think the chief can speak to specifically that, and maybe Sergeant Fuqua, if you want to follow up with him afterwards. It's a level of detail that they would be able to provide. Yes?
In the video, you can see Mr. Hill holding up his phone. Is there any chance his phone caught any of the interaction?
I'm not aware of that, but certainly it's possible. But I'm not aware of that, and that hasn't been made available to us, and nobody has mentioned that to us. But it is possible.
Why he's holding his phone, it's a very deliberate act. You know, it wasn't clear if he's filming or not, but it's very deliberate where he's holding it up.
We don't know that yet.
What do you want the citizens of Columbus to take away from what you're telling us today?
There are members of our community that are living in great fear right now. We've had 2 police-involved shootings, one involving the Sheriff's Department, one the Division of Police, where black men have died at the hands of law enforcement, and at least at this point, for no reason. There were no crimes being conducted. There was no call for service. There was no imminent threat. So there are members of our community that are living in fear. They're frustrated, they're exhausted, they're angry, they're demanding justice. And so to those, we owe comfort, reassurance, acknowledgement that what we have seen is wrong and unacceptable in this community, and that we stand with them to follow truth wherever it takes us and demand that justice is served.
Mayor, do you think the officers knew it was a black man and therefore shot him?
I don't know that yet. I haven't spoken to the officers, but I'll tell you this. I thought about this morning. Rowan Court isn't far away from Oberlin Drive. And my father or brother were walking out of my garage, would the result have been the same? Thanks, everybody.